Hello and welcome to Oh God What Now, the podcast that's up to attack the news before most other news outlets have had their avocado on toast. I'm Andrew Harrison, and on today's show we'll be looking at two sides of the political future. First, we thought populism was dying, but what if we were wrong? Sunak's gone all red meat pro-car and screw the planet. Farage is back, somehow. And in the United States, many Republicans say they'd still vote for Donald Trump, even if he gets sent to jail. What if populism is a permanent feature and not a wave? And if so, how do we fight it? And also a ray of hope. Are the kids actually all right? Why are millennials bucking the trend that the older you get, the more right-wing you are? To find out, let's meet today's panel. First up, it's commentator Andreou. Hello, commentator Andreou.
Hello.
So it's Migration Panic Week again. The first asylum seekers have been put on board the Bibi Stockholm in Portland. And when Stephen Kinnock over the weekend said that Labour would not be able to get people out of camps and barges immediately, this got turned into the headline, Labour will use migrant barges, as if it was a major decision. Did he mean it? And are Labour now stuck in a bidding war on who can be the meanest to migrants?
Well, I mean, I don't know if you watched the actual interview.
I'm never up that early.
Literally what Kinnock said was, we will work as quickly as possible to get people out of hotels and off barges.
Sounds
to
fair.
Which the Sky presenter responded, so you will keep using the barges? And he said, well, we'll inherit a mess and we can't just magic everyone somewhere else on day one.
Labour to leave dog on kitchen floor. Yes.
I mean, hugely overinterpreted. They probably don't particularly mind it, to be honest, because people who are sort of leftists who are interested in politics have probably heard this explanation already a dozen times. And people further out that maybe Labour are trying to attract are just seeing that big headline. So, but I mean, it's just grossly overinterpreted. And I think it denotes a stance on the part of the press. They really are out to get Labour at the moment. And they're really not satisfied with anything that sounds reasonable, which I think will be a huge problem going forward. Because, you know, we've become accustomed to such profound state dysfunction that if you look at areas like Brexit or housing or immigration, to say that the solution is build more houses, improve our relationship with the EU, process the claims in a timely way. It sounds almost glib, right? It sounds like it couldn't be that simple, or this lot would be doing it. The public have come to expect some sort of magical, very clever solution. You know, we will pack everyone up and send them to Ascension Island.
Well, this is what I want to ask you about. What did you make of the Home Office backpedaling frantically to say, well, we're not really going to send anybody to Ascension Island? It just seemed to, like, that was another one that seemed to generate itself.
Listen, I think this is one story that we are very, very safe to ignore, I think I can say. I mean, look, they announced they would be looking at barges 2.5 years ago. They bought the Bibi Stockholm in 9th of April this year, and they've only just put the first handful of people on it. So how long do you think it will take them to set up immigration camps on some uninhabited island in the Pacific, clear it through the courts, and start sending people there before the next election?
I'm not setting me clock for it.
Yes.
Political reporter at the New Statesman, Zoe Grunewald, is also with us. Hi, Zoe.
Hello.
So you've got a big piece in the Statesman this week saying that the British public are actually very concerned about climate change and they don't trust Rishi Sunak's sod-it-all approach. 51% of people said the government should spend more on public transport than provision for cars. 40% supported LTNs. What advice, this flies in the face of what Sunak's all about at the minute, what advice should he be taking as he reads his New Statesman while having a latte in Santa Monica?
I'm not sure he reads the New Statesman, actually, but I think if he did, the thing he should be taking from it is that the public are not in support of this new potential culture war that he's started about the environment. So, yeah, the polling company we used, Redfield and Wilton, found that about 82% of people said that climate change had mattered to them in the last month, right? And that was up there just behind the NHS and the cost of living. So top 3 priorities, environment was one of them. There's a huge discrepancy there because they also think that only 35% of people think that Sunak is committed to his net zero targets. So there's a huge discrepancy there between the people who want something to be done about climate change and the amount that actually think Sunak is doing something about it. And also, do they think that Sunak is a man of his word? Well, clearly not. They don't think he's committed, even though he's come out and said that he is. I think what was also quite interesting about the results, so you spoke about low traffic neighbourhoods, and we also did some polling about ULEZ as well, and we found quite similarly that quite a few people were in support. There was a sort of about a quarter that weren't, and then there was quite a large amount of don't knows. And I think what this shows both parties is that there's still quite a big sort of understanding gap in the general public about what low traffic neighbourhoods and ULEZ actually mean for them. And I think this is something that can be utilised by both parties, which is like, how do you actually educate people? How do you show them what the incentives are? How do you show them what the good things are about these things? And, there is a chance for Sunak to U-turn again and take people on the net zero journey with him if he wishes. He doesn't have to make it into a culture war. People are supportive and they may well like him more if he decides to stick with the green policies that they originally had.
Well, this is what you get if you hire Redfield and Wokerton, isn't it? Completing the New Statesman tag team is Marie Leconte, columnist at that fantastic publication and also author of Escape, the essential volume for terminally online millennials, out next week in paperback.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Bye. How you doing, Marie?
So I'm very well, thanks.
Now, GB News now has to contend with an additional 4 Ofcom investigations after the regulator opened cases on programmes hosted by Jacob Rees-Mogg, Philip Davis and Esther McVeigh. There are now 7 in total. I think they get one more and they win a prize of some sort. The channel has been investigated for breaches of impartiality, which it actually flaunts. Are they just trying to get judgments against themselves so they can say Ofcom is woke?
It sort of feels rather depressingly like a win-win situation for them, because if Ofcom ends up saying, actually, we've not found any breaches, you can continue, then that's totally fine for GB News. They can be like, the wokesters who tried to report us failed and lost and will live forever. And exactly as you said, I think if Ofcom actually does say, no, obviously this is insane, you cannot have members of parliament, doing this, then they can just say, well, that would be because Ofcom are communists, as we all know. And then
name.
Very good. And in that case, and get kind of a lot of sympathetic media coverage from the usual suspects, and on the circus goes. So again, I think it's one of those really frustrating things where whatever happens, they can probably find a way to win. So obviously they're going to keep playing.
God, it's awful.
It is. I'm happy to be here.
We've been living through a decade of populism and telling ourselves that it's going to blow over soon. We saw Trump lose the presidential election. 80% of people now think Brexit has failed. More than half would vote to rejoin the EU. And the Brexit-dependent Tory government is falling to pieces before our eyes. And yet, far-right parties are still in power or taking power across Europe. And at home, the populist playbook isn't spent. We were just talking about how Sunak has thrown himself into a populist, authoritarian, anti-environment stance. Even Nigel Farage has been able to resurrect himself. And The Guardian characterised the Conservatives' knife-edge victory in Uxbridge as the return of the sour spirit of Brexit. Do we have to stop thinking of populism as something that will burn itself out and get used to having to fight it in perpetuity? Alex, was there ever a moment, maybe perhaps when Biden won in 2020, that you thought actually populism is on the fade now?
Yeah. It was. I fully own up to that. I thought that Trump would need to be beaten once rather than several times, especially after January the 6th. I kept thinking that there is this line that at some point will be crossed and that there is a sort of a rump of the Republican Party that will be turned off by it. And I think it's a feature of my generation's sort of psychological makeup in a weird way. My life started entirely analog and is now mostly digital. My parents were born just before and during the war. My 2 grandmothers between them lost 7 children, either at childbirth or to childhood diseases. Yeah. Of my parents' generation, sort of 1 in 10 went to university, and 9 in 10 of me and my cousins' generation went to university. So there is this really deeply believed thing that the arc of history leans towards progress and that things in between are blips. And I don't know that I believe that now. I think it may have been irrational to think that that's what will happen, especially because of what's going on with the environment and this clash with populism, which I think will become more and more prominent because action on the environment will often be unpopular. And unless we get like really strong governance that is able to say, you may not love this, but it has to happen, we are in a world of shit. We really are.
Your strong pitch for the progressive authoritarianism there.
No, I mean, no, because it should be about explaining things. Like Euler's is a really good example, right? If all this stuff that came out after the Exbridge election, that it only affects a tiny percentage of cars, that, that the scrappage scheme can be expanded to help people. If all of that stuff had come out before the election, it would be less of an issue. So it is a communication thing. But at the same time, you can't just have leadership that just looks at what do people really enjoy and just does that all the time.
We've been in a kind of an open-air worldwide seminar on this stuff for about a decade now, and you want to be really reductive about it. There are two sides to populism. There's the side that talks about elites in order to sort of set the public against the institutions that protect them from kind of overweening centralised government. That attacks things like the BBC or the courts or the civil service. And the other side is that you refuse to accept that there's any such thing as a complex problem. You do cakeism. Everything can be solved by the most simple thing, usually that a guy in a pub could come up with. Now, cakeism has taken a real battering in Britain over the past decade, but the elites angle seems pretty intact. We hear more about elites now than ever. What do we do about that? Are we ever going to get out from the elite discourse?
I don't know that cakeism has taken that much of a battering, by the way, because if you look at
that people
on Brexit, but if you look at Sunak's new stance on the environment, that is exactly what he's saying. We can dig up more fossil fuels, burn it, and still reach our net zero climate. And it's like, how are you going to do that? That is classic cakeism. But on the second, the elite stuff, I mean, it's almost comical at the moment to have these super wealthy donors, these press barons, these entitled Telegraph journalists, or these university professors like Goodwin, telling everyone else that they're the establishment, that they're the elite.
That we're the elite and they're not. They're the kind of
telling everyone else. That's what I'm saying. They're telling everyone else that they're the elite. And you have to do a double take sometimes and go, I what now? I'm really not.
Well, I mean, the bad news is we're all elite in this room, apparently, because we do a podcast, and that's elite behaviour.
And again, I'm currently wearing a T-shirt I found in the street, so I don't know if that's elite behaviour or not. But
that's vintage, so it's recycling, therefore it's elite. Marie, I mean, Sunak has thrown himself, as we were just saying, into the full GB News agenda, pro-car, anti-environment, an enabler of authoritarian law and order stuff, and yet he's not the populist personality, is he? He kind of looks like Roland Rat and hey guys. Can he wear those clothes successfully, do you think?
Well, so I think the problem with Sunak, I think he's a more interesting character than he seems at first glance because actually, he is right wing. If you look at the policy stuff he cares about and he wants to do that, he is on the kind of right wing of the Conservative Party, and he always was. And I think it's just the fact that he was not painted as such during the leadership campaign and even before that is probably sort of quite racialized and to do with his wealth, etc. In the same way that really early on people were like, Kemi Badenoch. I don't know if you remember that, but there were a few months people were like, Kemi Badenoch, the new rising star of the centrist Tories. And then she opened her mouth and obviously was incredibly right-wing. And it's like, oh, is it perhaps that she's a black woman? So you kind of assumed she was a centrist. So I feel like there's a similar thing that has been happening with Rishi. And again, he's, sort of quite, I don't know, nearly, he's quite Cameroon coded in a weird way. Like you could see him like having got really excited about like Obama and like maybe going to campaign for Hillary, stuff like that. Like he's got, is the vibe theory of politics. But all that being said, obviously he's not really that. But all of that being said, he is still in practice more of a technocrat. Like he may be very right wing, but ultimately he's kind of the numbers guy. Like, he's not the person who will go and give the sort of like grand stump speech and kind of, really passionate language, etc. So he's a weird mix of two things, because normally you kind of get the more technocratic politicians towards the centre and the populists kind of, towards the right or towards the left. So he's, I think, in and of itself, he's kind of occupies a weird spot.
But it's populist content without populist presentation, isn't it? Because when you look at his policy agenda, it is straight from GB News. It's there to please the car guy. It's there to please the Daily Mail reader.
It's also what he believes, though, I think.
But he doesn't present in that way. And I'm interested to know, is that actually an advantage or a disadvantage to him?
Ooh, I'm not sure. I think the problem is, and I think we sort of hinted at it a bit earlier, is that people don't really see him again as a very right-wing sort of populist. He's very sort of liberal Tory coded. So I'm not really sure. Like, is there going to be a point at which the public kind of like realizes that's who he is and doesn't like it? Is there, or will people think, actually, hang on, he sounds like a phony? Because clearly he can't possibly believe all of that because, I had my assumptions about this man. I don't think it's going to go well for him, but I'm not sure in which way yet.
Yeah. It's going to go badly, but you don't quite know how.
Yeah.
From which direction. Yeah. The sudden reappearance of Farage with the worst possible thing, a good point about banks, kind of amazed me. Is he a symptom of something that a chunk of the British people want in politics, which is a permanent kind of lord of misrule, permanent disruptor fella? Because he just attaches himself to whatever happens to be the next thing along the kind of populist conveyor belt. He doesn't seem to have a core agenda. It's just, what can I leap on that will put me
He just
in the papers?
really loves attention. Absolutely. So I think that the one maybe saving grace here when talking about Farage is that we still don't really have a Farage 2.0. And I think lots of people, both within politics and the media, etc., have tried to kind of set themselves up as the kind of, again, like populist, very right-wing, etc. No one's really managed it. I think like Nigel Farage, weirdly, is very much in a class of his own.
Yeah.
So I do think that he will sort of keep coming back, and we just will never be able to get rid of him for the rest of our natural lives. But on the bright side, again, I don't think he's created a kind of like type of person that British politics will just keep having forever. I think it's very specifically a Farage problem as opposed to a structural one.
So you think we dodged a bullet there in that, like in Britain, we might have the kind of elements of populism in policy. We don't actually have a populist leader in waiting. I mean, Johnson couldn't pull it off, and he was by far, in his horrible way, the most charismatic figure we've seen in British politics, with the possible exception of Farage. There aren't any there's nobody on the bench, as it were.
No, there isn't like an obvious populist leader waiting to take the reins. I mean, when people talk about who's going to succeed Sunak, it's often Braverman, maybe Badenoch, and they're obviously quite right-wing, quite populist. But I don't know. I'm doubtful, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in a bit more detail. I just think the Conservative Party tends to win when it's in the centre. And actually, obviously, depending on how badly the Tories lose the next election, how many seats are lost and where they're lost, I reckon it will be quite a moderate party. I know a lot of people don't think that, but I do think it will turn out to be quite a moderate party rather than push to the right. I mean, there's a lot of different factors, and it depends on who loses their seat and what wins the election for Labour if Labour do win. But yeah, I feel like, Johnson, it's weird, as you were saying, Sunak, he's sort of like got populist policies, but quite like a non-populist face. It's like Johnson was the other way around. Actually, Johnson's policies originally were quite one nation-y. Like he seemed, and he was.
I found myself walking to work this morning, and the horrible thought entered my head that, like, at least if Johnson was still Prime Minister, we wouldn't have a bonfire of green policies.
No.
And I don't want to think that thought.
No.
Not if it suited him politically. We would have it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he might have chucked
Harry
some
would have
meat.
divorced him over it, so I think he would have had to do it.
True. And he had goals.
I think he's ready for the next one now, so I don't think it would have stopped him.
But yeah, no, I can't. I think you're right. I think we've not ever quite like gone full force populist leader. Like we've always like maybe had like a little bit there, but there's been something more to it. And yeah, I feel like generally the British public tend to be centre right and therefore not very populist.
It's the answer to why we don't get these people actually contained in the pages of Britannia Unchained, which is the British actually prefer football and pop music.
Very, I think we do. I'm sure that's true. And all our politicians at the minute, they just no one's like that charismatic, that attention grabbing, are they? Like we haven't really had a really charismatic leader for a while. I mean, people talk about Johnson, but like he was pretty disliked by a lot of people as well. And I do think that the 2019 election where he became Prime Minister, people think that's all to do with how great, how well liked Johnson was. But a lot of people were voting for Johnson through gritted teeth, I think. So I think we can overestimate how popular Johnson was as well.
So I'm interested to know why you say that. You think that after what happens in the next election, it might produce more of a moderate Conservative Party, because the received wisdom is they're going to go through what Labour went through in 1983 or 2015, push themselves further to their own extremes and spend like 5 to 10 years in a psychological turmoil as they work out that the thing they really, really like is not really, really liked by the electorate. So why do you think that's not going to happen?
So I think there's two options, there's like two outcomes, but obviously there's a few changeable factors. But like, I genuinely believe that if the election, Labour win, and it's seen as a referendum on how popular Starmer was, and Labour win and Starmer's got a lot of popularity, then I think you'll definitely see a shift towards the centre. If, however, because they'll want to sort of emulate, they want to create the newest thing that's a bit like Starmer. If, however, Labour win, but there's lots of questions about why Labour win, were they just a protest vote? I think there'll be a large section of the Conservative Party who say we should have had more red meat, we should have really pushed on immigration, we should have done that. And I do think that will happen. But I do think, actually, if you look at what sort of seats are at risk of being lost, you might lose quite a lot of those right-wing, red wall Tories and keep a lot of the sort of safe seat moderates. And you're looking at sort of the Mordaunt's and people like that, who I think are quite likely to actually grab power and to keep the Conservative Party harnessed quite closely to the centre. I don't think it will prevent the argument. And I think you will definitely still hear those NatCons going, no more immigration, all social workers, all care workers must be from the UK. But I actually don't think, when you look at the influence, it will be a right-leaning influence.
So I should put my fiver on a Penny Mordaunt versus Miriam Cates leadership
James
contest.
Cleverly. It's obviously going to be James Cleverly. I don't know why. I've not put any money in it because I'm not a betting woman, but he strikes me as the obvious. But no, so one last point.
They're already doing hatchet jobs on him.
Well, yes, I know he's. Yeah.
There must be rivals in the wings that are briefing against him.
I was going to agree. So the other point as well. So I did a piece recently on the on the fact the right of the Tory party is being very vocal at the moment, and the centrist not so much. But actually, what's really interesting is that when you talk to them, to the kind of more centristy Tories, what they say is like, we're busy just letting them tire themselves out. But what we're doing is actually we've got quite a tight grip on all the selections. And actually, if you look at the candidates picked in Conservative, winnable seats, of which there are, 3.
Easy to look at then.
Lots of them are actually, so apart from maybe Nick Timothy, who's kind of his own wing of the party, but like everyone else is actually just like quite centristy and quite bland, middle of the road conservative. So again, I can't really think of any massive right wing firebrands that have been selected anywhere. So I think again, they're kind of playing the long game at the moment.
I'll disagree slightly, not with necessarily the outcome. I think it's a perfectly possible outcome, but with the mode by which we get there, because I have the feeling it's not actually that rational. I think our politics are a sort of what Komijarewski used to call chocolate box variety naturalism. They're sort of cast like commedia dell'arte. The reason we don't have another Farage in the, that we can spot is because Farage hasn't left the fucking stage. So no one can step into that stereotypical
So it's like musical chairs.
role.
Somebody's in that seat.
Yes, absolutely. And so I think, to a huge extent, what direction the Conservative Party takes going forward depends on which power brokers within the Conservative Party will decide that the next election is it for them, and sort of step away. And the people who step up to fill their positions, which I think is too much of a moving puzzle for me to confidently predict now which way it's going to
That's
go.
no
right?
fun. That's why you're not a columnist.
I might be wrong, but at least I'm certain. The columnist's job.
Exactly. Thank you very much.
And the other thing, again, tying into I'm going to run with this chocolate box
Keep going.
politics
I like
idea.
the commedia dell'arte. Well, mine is good.
Well, because
Actors made of chocolate. We can mix them, I think.
No, because it's basically a selection. You want a couple of each, right? You don't want a box that has 15 caramel and no...
Otherwise you buy Maltesers.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so the other thing I was going to say on that same metaphor is that very often you don't know what the chocolate is until you bite into it. And actually people who look one way on their way up, are playing a really specific game in order to get to the top, and how they react then to having power, to having the real leadership, is not something that is completely predictable.
Are you saying Boris Johnson was the Turkish delight? I didn't go, bloody hell, I wasn't expecting that.
Literally.
I quite like Turkish delight.
I do as well, yeah.
And he's actually Turkish.
I know,
so.
yes.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that this is generally very good analysis, I think, on how power changes people psychologically. But my main thought was like, you didn't read the little paper to find out which is which. That's insane behaviour. Like, you just take chocolates not knowing what they're going to be.
People don't read the manifesto, Marie.
No, I do read the paper.
No. Actually, I was not. I was just talking about the chocolates.
I read the paper obsessively, and I get really upset if the paper gets lost.
Yeah, oh, thank God.
But often they are very difficult to tell. Like you get one that is 3 parallel straight lines and one that is like 3 parallel wavy lines, and you're like, these two look exactly the same.
The bit of paper is known as the instructions, by the way. The instructions for the chocolate.
It's my second language. I'm so sorry.
This is how you don't get this on the news agents, do you? Analysis of politics in the medium of the chocolate box. Next up, it's time to choose our hero and villain of the week. Who's sold out their show at the Fringe and who's burned off their own Fringe. Each of the panel is going to nominate a hero and a villain, and I am going to decide who is the hero and the villain because I am an autocrat. Marie, who are you nominating as hero and who is your villain?
So my villain is David Tissey-Davies, the Welsh Secretary of State, because he released a leaflet that was called out as racist and quite a bit of a dog whistle by GRT charities and associations. So kind of talking about Gypsy and Traveller Side coming to your area soon and really, really encouraging people to write into the Labour Council to let them know what they made of that, which is just a bit like, I don't know, it feels, it's 2023, like must we still do sort of, that sort of attitudes towards travellers. So that was quite depressing. And also, again, you're a Secretary of State, please do your job instead.
Did he actually have Conservative on his leaflet?
Good question.
Because they're all not doing that now, aren't they?
Yeah, and they're even like green or like other colours entirely, which is quite funny.
So we'll make them red. Why not?
So my hero is a bit of a bold choice because we do not know who it is. But very specifically, I am nominating the person who told the Times that they refused an honour from Liz Truss because it would be, I quote, humiliating. Because that made me laugh so much.
That is brilliant.
That finally some self-awareness.
2 people knocked back the honour, didn't they?
They did, but one specifically said it would have been humiliating.
Now, you're an insider. Who do you think it might be?
I genuinely don't know.
You must have some kind of, spider sense
honestly,
idea.
because we don't even know what kind of honour it was.
Okay.
So I think that probably would have helped it. But
Yeah, exactly. It might have been an OB for someone.
But yes, I just found that hysterical.
I'm sure we can work something out. Oh, what's your nominations, Alex, for hero and villain?
So my hero is Jackie McKenzie, who is the immigration lawyer that was picked on and named and then unnamed over the weekend about the one that's apparently in the web of deceit of Starmer's in trying to... stop the government from sending...
Stop the boats.
I mean, I don't even know what the charge was. It was Braverman's piece, so it was incoherent. But I find it extraordinary because she's now fighting back. So she posted on social media that apparently the government compiled a dossier on her and sent it to 4 partisan newspapers to basically do a hatchet job on her.
They doxed her.
And I find this really quite extraordinary happening simultaneously to them complaining that the posh bank that Nigel Farage was at, did a dossier on him and decided basically to offer him their more basic product rather than their premium one. And at the same time, the state, with all its might, is compiling fucking dossiers and sending them to papers against individual citizens. So she's my hero of the week for fighting back. And my villain of the week is Rishi Sunak. Not for any of the obvious reasons, just because I think, who the fuck goes on holiday and wakes up at 6 o'clock in the morning to go to a spinning class, not just to go exercise like in the hotel gym or go for a run, but to go to a public spinning class where you'll be seen and require some massive security operation. I think he's a sociopath. I disagree with you. Like he hasn't seen his family in a year, and he wakes up in the middle of the night to go be seen at a spinning class. That is American psycho territory.
I've rarely heard you that angry, which I really respect that. There's one thing I hate.
It's just the cheapest possible.
It's not just a spin class, Alex. It's a Taylor Swift themed.
Oh, fuck. Okay, fine. No, okay, I'm on board now. Oh, my Jesus Christ.
Oh, yeah, sorry, you're on board with me.
I just really hate Taylor Swift.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say that just makes it worse.
Yeah, weirdly, that's clinched it for me. Yeah, fine.
This is where Zoe outs herself as like a full-on Swiftie.
I actually am. I've got eras all ticket. Yeah, okay.
Zoe Grunewald, hero and villain. Speak your truth.
I've got 200 heroes this week because I'm cheating a bit. But I think the team of scientists working at the high security lab in Wiltshire on the next pandemic vaccine are doing a great job. I also think they're probably under, attack on social media today from all these COVID conspiracy theorists, because obviously if you're already preemptively working on a vaccine, you can just imagine what all the anti-vaxxers are going to be saying. But they're obviously doing a really great thing, which we'll all be very grateful for when we all get bird flu in 2 years' time or whatever. That's just a prediction. That's not. Yeah, I don't. If we do get bird flu in 2 years' time, it's not because I had some secret.
This will turn up on YouTube.
Yeah, it will.
How did this woman know?
Yeah.
How she's in on the in?
The Negroni swilling media elite. They're all in on it.
The Light newspaper will do a story on you or something. Yeah.
Okay. My villain is also Rishi Sunak at the spin class, but also I'm adding in Matt Hancock because there's two reasons for this, right? So Sunak, spin class, holiday, I think shameless opportunism. I agree with you. I think it's very cynical. He's trying to be in touch with young people and their love of Taylor Swift. I just think it's very cynical. He could have done, you're telling me he couldn't have just gone on his...
You could have gone downstairs and had a swim.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Yeah, but I'm adding in Matt Hancock because I don't know if anyone saw his annoying TikTok video of him doing the I'm Just Ken song, miming the I'm Just Ken song from the Barbie movie. And I think they're both villains for the same reason, that they're just jumping on these media trends to try and buff themselves up as, darlings and get support from young people. And I just find it super irritating because it's so cynical, it's so cringy, and it's like, just do your fucking job.
Hancock video is like a natural contraceptive, isn't it?
Oh, it's just so awful.
It will kill anyone's boner in 10 seconds flat.
Yeah. Also, this man was the Secretary of State for DCMS, and the camera quality is so bad. I mean, I know he's on a beach, but the camera's terrible.
Okay, judgment. I'm going to give hero has to go to the person or persons who knocked back in honour from Liz Truss, because they're absolutely right, and they speak for us all, because it would be the crappiest honour of the lot, wouldn't it?
And also Liz Truss must know who it is, so I really like saying, mate, really come on. Thanks for the gift, but Jesus.
It's the sort of thing that in 10 years will end up in Who's Who with an asterisk.
Of a villain, I'm going to hive off Matt Hancock from Rishi Sunak, because we'll be calling him a villain all the time. I am giving it to Matt Hancock on his own, because at least Rishi Sunak going to a spin class, it has a purpose. It is at least exercising. It may be, as you say, sociopathic and terrible thing to do when you're on a family holiday, but at least he's trying to get fit. This was just craven need for attention, and the absolute cringe inside out. What does Roman say on Succession? I cringe so hard I turned into a fossil. That's what that clip would make you do. Now, the perennial battle of humanity. Young versus the old. One of the reasons many of us thought that populism might fade away is that the boomer generation will soon lose its position of majority voting power. And the usual rule, though, is that the older right-wing generation gets replaced by a new generation who get more conservative as their mortgages and the other miseries of life start to kick in. Except it looks like that's not happening now. Millennials are bucking the trend and getting more liberal. So what's that going to do to politics? And why can't these millennials put down their avocado toasties and frappuccinos and hurry up and save us? A bit of background, right? Okay, I looked at various graphic representations of demographics. The population is going to age before there is a younger majority, but the bulge, if you can envisage a bulge that's currently 20 to 45, it's as big as the bulge that is currently 50 to 75. So it's going to slot in
It's
quite
very
nicely.
surprising, right?
Yeah, it looks like one of those ancient, those kind of clay dolls, sort of fertility women.
Yeah.
It looks exactly like that. So they're going to slot right into place, and their opinions and their beliefs are very different. Over the next 15 to 20 years, millennials will start to outnumber boomers. Luckily, we've got two under 30s on the panel to balance me and Alex with our Who Remembers the Summer of Love
Did you say
perspective.
under 30?
Are you under 30?
Yeah. Now you've said I am 100. I have never been
Definitely.
more.
Are you sure about that?
Yeah, like 100%. Yeah,
It's
my passport is in Canada. That's why I can't show it to you
Fantastic.
right now.
When
Okay.
was the Summer of Love, by the way?
The second Summer of Love was 1988.
All right, okay.
And that's the one that
I
counts.
thought you meant the first one. I was
No.
going to say fuck
It was
off.
when I was born. Anyway, so Zoe, an FT survey in December found that boomers and Generation X. I'm going to do that again without this.
No, Alex remembers Casanova. They went partying together.
So Zoe, an FT survey in December found that boomers and Generation X did become more right-wing as they got older, but that wasn't holding true for millennials, the ones born between 1981 and 1996. They started out voting 10% less conservative than the average by vote when they were 20, but they went more left as they got to 40. They were 20% less conservative on the aggregate vote. Why is this happening now? Does it boil down to I can't buy a house, therefore destroy capitalism?
Well, I do think the not being able to buy a house thing is a big part of it. Because, house buying is like the ultimate conservative dream, isn't it? It's your accumulation of capital. It's your place that you buy and then you have your family in it and then you have something to protect and conserve. So that's why people were, I guess, once they bought a house, feeling more inclined to vote Conservative. But I also think this is interesting because, and this isn't me being a big Blair apologist.
No, that's fine by me.
But I do think it's interesting because I think like this generation specifically grew up in a time where, just in 97, there was this feeling of like, there's a Labour government and things are going to get better. And I think that feeling is still like in the memory for a lot of these people. And then things just started getting progressively worse. And then we had 13 years of Conservative rule where wages were completely stagnant, house building stopped, prices up. And of course, loads of people pushed into university with these huge student loans that they have no chance of getting rid of. So I think basically what you've seen is a generation that was brought up with a little bit of hope and then just saw it getting trashed again and again. And, house building and house buying is a big part of it. But I actually think it's just this general sort of knock-on domino effect of all these things are getting worse and worse. And I think as well that the Conservative government and the Conservative Party just seem to have this general disregard for young people. I mean, remember what Johnny Mercer said just the other day in the by-elections about, you can't have how old is Kim?
25?
25? Yeah, you can't have a 25-year-old in politics, like the in-betweeners.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the attitude that people get from the Conservative Party. You just feel that they just have this, regard for young people. They've even let nightlife in the UK go to ruin. And then you get politicians like Lee Anderson who like to mock young people and students, and it just seems very kind of they just seem hostile to young people, and I think they pick up on that.
We do seem to have an understandably pessimistic cohort of young people at the moment. BBC surveyed 16 to 24-year-olds in November, and they found just vestigial positivity about the future. Only 17% thought the future in general was going to be better. 20% thought the economy was better. 26% thought the environment will be better in the future. And I bet that's changed since November. Boomers came of age when politics was changing the country for the better. We now have a cohort that thinks it's not going to. How do you think that relates to moving right or left in the future?
Yeah, I think young people are kind of a bit void of hope at the minute. I mean, one of the things I hear mostly from my peers and that I'm most worried about is the environment. But there's other stuff as well. I mean, if you can't get on the property ladder, I think a lot of young people are wondering if they'll ever be able to have families. You don't want to have a child if your landlord is just going to kick you out 2 months later. And I think people are really worried about that. I think, if we had a Labour government, at least they would be able to do something which the Conservative government are stuck on, which is actually have a cohesive plan for building houses, because they don't have so many NIMBYs in their party. They actually do have quite a optimistic approach to planning reform and things like that.
Yeah.
But I do worry, specifically Sunak's kind of vibe shift on the environment as well. I think that is worrying. And that's not the sort of thing we can just kick the can down the road on. Like, we need to act now on it. The economy, that's worrying. I don't know. I mean, I think people tend to think that these things go in peaks and troughs. But, how many years of economic turmoil do you have before you kind of ruin a generation's prospects and their savings and things like that? So I do understand the sense of fear.
And also set in stone their political beliefs and their political orientations. Definitely under 30, Marie Leconte. The FT says that we, in Britain and the US, we've got by far the least conservative 35-year-olds in recorded history.
I mean, it's really hard for me to talk about that because 35 is actually so far away from the age I am.
In the future for you, like old people, So, I mean, does this chime with you and your...
No, it actually does. And I think it is... So I find it kind of fascinating because I've been kicking around Westminster for nearly a decade now. So I've got quite a lot of friends in Westminster and quite a lot of like quote unquote normal friends.
Yeah.
And I think just by virtue of, the Tories have been in power for that entire time, probably just about most of my Westminster friends are Conservatives. Anyone else, but literally I think anyone else who does not work in politics is not a Tory. Like, I don't believe I really know a single normal person my age who votes Conservative. And we're talking about people who are, again, in their 20s or 30s, the older ones. So I'm going to stop now with this. And they're more often than not, people on very decent salaries, white-collar workers, from quite middle-class backgrounds. And not a single one of them votes Tory. We do have quite a lot of Lib Dems, which is always quirky. And then the rest of just, Labour voters or Green voters. And that's that, which is really, really striking. Because then a lot of those people, you can tell not that long ago, would have naturally been sort of like Cameroons if this all happened about a decade ago.
It is. Do you think when we take the long view of this, the Conservatives will be seen to have done some really, really bad and inept electoral politics by cutting off the pipeline that used to manufacture their voters? Like, get a house, get some debt, start to worry about your tax, then you'll vote Conservative. And they've almost deliberately gone about severing that.
They did. And so the weird thing as well, so I think obviously, and I know that's what we're talking about now, the fact that young people no longer really vote Tory. But also what's really interesting is that old people did not used to vote Tory that much. So it's very much a game of two halves here. I think, it's also, if you look at the stats on older people, they also did not used to be that, that split towards the Conservatives. So, I'm not at risk of being slightly crass, if you had to pick one of those two, you'd probably pick more younger people voting for you, right? More seriously, it is a weird thing. And I do wonder how much of it, and listeners of the podcast know that I'm normally not that Brexit obsessed, but on this specific issue, I do wonder if a lot of it is not also just Brexit, because actually even younger people who already may be voting Conservative or like considering going down that path were still almost certainly Remainers if you look at demographics and age and stuff. So I think I wonder as well if that may not change once the referendum kind of moves further and further away in the past.
Well, the two clearest determinants of which way you voted in the referendum were education and age, weren't they? If you had been,
and these are really closely tied anyway. So I mean, no, absolutely. So I think it's one of those where there's, it's a bit Occam's razor. Why young people not voting Conservative? Maybe because actually, basically none of them voted for Brexit, and then the Conservatives became the party of Brexit. Yeah.
Alex, more polling. The think tank Onward, Conservative think tank, found that 62% of 25 to 40-year-olds think the Conservatives deserve to lose the next election. Not just that they're not going to vote for them, that they think they really deserve to lose. There seems to be a kind of an element of rancour and vengeance out there. Is this what happens when you basically, as we say, lock people out of being able to start their lives, really?
I think there are a lot of factors in that. And I don't think that had the economics been different, or had the Conservatives over the last 13 years built more houses, that sort of 20 to 45-year-olds would be cock-a-hope about voting Conservative. Because I think the calculation has become more complicated. It has to do with environmental issues, which I think loom large in that cohort's mind. I think it has to do with ideology. I think conservative ideology is quite tired. It's quite hackneyed. It's taken quite a beating. It's discredited. And I haven't seen them move to something else. This is a generation of politicians that grew up with the idea that you can grow the pie exponentially and that wealth trickles down. And that is now thoroughly discredited. And I don't see I don't see an economic theory, a political ideology there that stepped in to replace it. Like even young people in the Conservative Party, they sort of embrace a sort of old fuddy-duddyism almost to fit in. They make themselves look and sound like old people. And so I think unless the Conservative Party goes away and sort of thinks quite deeply about what is the ideology we're selling here, what kind of society are we saying that if we are in power we can make happen? I couldn't discern that from Rishi Sunak, for example, at the moment, who is a very young Conservative politician, right? If you ask me what sort of country would Rishi Sunak like the UK to be, I really could not tell you at all.
It would be something like Singapore, but, very vaguely
It wouldn't
drawn.
even be that interesting.
Yeah.
I think the Tories are kind of stuck in a slightly weird, twisted fairy tale whereby David Cameron and George Osborne, to an extent, had to work very hard to make the party palatable again to kind of, young metropolitan liberals and younger people, etc. And they kind of got there in the end and obviously were clearly successful enough that lots of people in the capital, either the kind of, I suppose, elite tastemakers, whatever you want to call them, did actually, like quite a lot of them did vote Conservative. And then you have that wave of Conservative MPs who came in and were like, well, we'll never lose again because actually all these people love us. And then proceeded to destroy everything Cameron had done to detoxify the party, and now just like, well, what happened? They hate us now, and it's like, well, yeah, because that that guy you dislike, the reason you dislike him is because he worked quite hard on winning you those people.
Yeah,
and in his so again, and it feels that now they just have to reinvent Cameronism effectively,
but also
which they hate. So again, there's a weird, But
also Cameron and Osborne did create the nightmare as well. The austerity is the root of all of this. They didn't just come in and go, hey, we're
Brexit,
great. It was the recklessness of austerity that produces the resentment of Brexit, that also produces communism. So it's those two stupid bastards. It's always them.
No, but again, it feels like a weird, or something like a Greek tragedy or something. That there's, the way that story goes.
Anyway, back to young people to wrap it up. Are we optimistic then that this kind of bulge, that demographic bulge that's going through, is going to reach its moment of power, its majority, when it's in the place where the boomers are now? And it will be more progressive, more social democratic, and it will hang on to that into later life. What do you think?
I would think so. I think it's going to take a long time for young people to forgive the Conservative Party for the many betrayals they think that they have experienced. Obviously, I think there will still be some people who change their political ideology as they get older. We're also going to have more pressures, I think, things like that. I mean, there will be more immigration, there will be more sacrifices as we move towards net zero, and those are the sort of things that can change people's mind. But I do think ultimately, and this is Starmer's bringing Labour more towards the centre as well. I mean, maybe he'll capture all those people who would have been Conservative but not in favour of a left-wing Labour government. So it's interesting to see how Labour are shifting, and it's interesting to see whether any of those issues actually impact that generation as they get older. But my instinct is that this generation will be more left-leaning, more progressive for quite a long time.
We've reached the end of the show, so it's time for escape routes, the books, films, bits of music, art, whatever you like, that take our minds off the boiling nightmare that is politics. Zoe, what are you taking your mind off the boiling nightmare that is politics with at the moment?
So usually I tell you about some terrible reality TV show I'm watching, but actually I am doing something a little bit more cultured because my boyfriend's parents moved house recently, and when they moved house, they dug up his old keyboard. So we now have that in our house, just sat on our dining room table because our house is tiny and that's the only place it fits. But I remembered that I actually used to teach myself chords and sing along. So at the minute I am, performing for the O2 Arena, Taylor Swift songs, obviously, while he's upstairs with his noise cancelling headphones on. And I'm having a great time. I'm loving it. I'm doing it for 3 hours every night. Just all you need is C, F, D, E, maybe A minor, and you're sorted.
Are we saying synth duo? Are you basically standing it passively?
No, not quite. It's just me, and I'm really, really enjoying it. It's Yes, lovely.
Sounds
It's a nice
good.
way to spend my time. It is, yeah.
Tremendous. Get away from the keyboard all day and on the keyboard all night.
Exactly, yeah.
Alex, how about you?
I'm delighted Zoe has not bagged the trashy corner for today, because mine is very trashy. So there's a procedural on Amazon Prime that I had never seen before called The Mentalist. And I am mainlining it. It is fabulous. The premise is that the guy is like so observant that people think he's psychic, but he's not. The fun thing about it is that because it's targeted at a sort of mainstream 8 p.m. American network audience, all this stuff that he's meant to be brilliantly observing is like so obvious. You know everything that's going on from the first 3 minutes of the episode. It's like everything is telegraphed in an amazingly obvious way. And everyone around him is like, how did you know that? It's like, yeah, because he saw them like literally mouth it to each other.
How did you know
Anyway.
that guy in a T-shirt that says, I like murdering people was a murderer?
I know, it's brilliant. Anyway, The Mentalist, fantastic popcorn thing, will really take your mind off stuff.
What's it on?
Amazon Prime.
Amazon Prime. Marie LeConte?
I am reading one of those books that, and I mean that as a compliment, but I would say so good it's actively annoying. So it's Priest Daddy, all in one word, by Patricia Lockwood, and it's a memoir of. So she's a sort of very online writer, essayist, poet, etc. And it's kind of a memoir of her life growing up in the Midwest with her dad, who's like an insane priest, basically, and her mum, who's just insane, and kind of all their siblings and stuff moving around from church to church. So, which doesn't sound that fun, but I don't even know how to explain it without sounding like I'm sort of being paid for it. But it is like genuinely laugh out loud funny. That I have laughed out loud in public numerous times while reading it, but also incredibly clever and really beautifully written. And again, you read it, and especially as a writer, and you're like, all right, like Jesus Christ, I don't need to brag, fucking hell. But no, it's unlike any other book I've read. I think it's really unique. But God, I felt like I'm being like Patricia Lockwood is like sending me a check in the post for this, which she's not. But,
Priest Daddy.
Priest Daddy. Yeah. Oh, no, actually, so the best endorsement I can give it is that my handbag got nicked last week, and it was in my handbag. Not quite the first thing I did, but once I'd replaced, the card, and once I'd cancelled my card and phone, etc., the first thing I did is go to Foyles to buy another copy of Priest Daddy, because I was like, no, I was halfway through. I want to finish this.
This is how she sells the books, you see. She goes around pinching people's bags and go buy another one. Well, mine, I'm a terribly uncultured fellow, and I don't go to the theatre very often, but I went to see The Effect at the National Theatre in London, and it's a revival of a Lucy Prebble play, Lucy Succession Prebble, that came out in 2012, and I thought it was fantastic, absolutely fantastic, mind-expanding and thrilling piece of theatre. The gist of it is we're watching a drug trial. People are being given antidepressants to work out what the effect of it is on kind of volunteers, and relationships begin to develop inside the drug trial, and people are unaware of whether their feelings are real or whether they're counterfeit generated by the drugs. Ooh. This then spirals off into a thing that's incredibly intense, incredibly thought-provoking, also extremely funny, brilliant performances. It's been rejigged and remade for an all-black cast, and there are residences in there that perhaps were not in the original, that have Billie Piper in it as the female lead. Incredibly well presented. It's kind of in the round, except not fully in the round. There's audience at two sides of the stage. No sets as such. Everything is delineated by squares of light and captions appearing on the stage. And you feel like I've never seen Black Mirror, but I'm told this is what Black Mirror is like. To me, it was like if Lucy Prebble of Succession fame had written a Thug's Future Shock for 2000 AD, where they do the kind of Twilight Zone, take reality, twist it a little bit, but look at the moral upshot, the moral kind of consequences of a vaguely, slightly science fiction scenario. Fantastic.
Well,
The Effect. Yeah, give it a go.
Yeah.
Because I'm a theatre critic now. I talk about theatre.
I'm reeling
amazing,
from
yeah.
the revelation you've never seen a single episode of Black Mirror.
Just never fitted it in.
No, same actually. Yeah, it just doesn't feel.
What
I
is
think what killed it for me was the tweet that was that
What is going on?
So like the tweet that was every episode of Black Mirror is like, what if phones but too much. And that made me laugh so much. I was like, I feel sated now.
That is the...
You should watch the one with Rory Kinnear where he is the Prime Minister and he has to have sex with
actually, I have seen that one. I've seen the pig shagging one.
Nosedive, I think, is...
Nosedive is really good.
Is my favourite
So
episode.
I don't like creepy things.
No, Nosedive is
creepy.
about basically your media ranking, your social media ranking, determining the sort of house you can rent and...
So what if phones but too
how-
much?
But too much, exactly.
What if China but here? That's what it is, I guess, social ranking. Well, there you go. We're all culturally charged up now. And that is the end of the Tuesday edition of Oh God, What Now? Thank you to Marie.
Thank you.
Thank you to Alex.
My pleasure.
And thank you to Zoe.
Thank you.
Oh God, What Now will be back on Friday or on Thursday if you're a Patreon backer. So please consider being a Patreon backer. Just search Oh God, What Now Patreon to find out about early shows without adverts on them, exciting merchandise, all that kind of stuff. Thanks for listening to this edition, and we will see you next time.